The wind howled across the frozen landscape of Kepler 442b, carrying tiny ice crystals that felt like needles against exposed skin. Dr. Sarah Chen pulled her thermal jacket tighter as she watched the alien expedition team through the observation dome's reinforced glass. The Zephyrians, tall and graceful with their silver blue skin and elongated limbs, were clearly suffering in the -40-degree temperature. It had been 3 weeks since the joint research mission landed on this ice world. The humans had come prepared with advanced cold weather gear, insulated shelters, and heating systems powered by their fusion generators. The Zephyrians, however, had made a critical miscalculation. Their homeworld of Zephyr Prime maintained a constant temperature of 28 degrees Celsius, with humidity levels that never dropped below 60%. Their biology was perfectly adapted to warm, moist environments, but completely unprepared for the brutal cold of Kepler 442b. Commander Veltar, the Zephyrian expedition leader, stood near the human base camp's entrance. His normally radiant silver skin had taken on a dull, grayish tone, and his breathing created visible clouds in the frigid air. The translator device around his neck crackled with static from the cold as he spoke to Sarah through the intercom. "Dr. Chen, our heating units are failing faster than our engineers can repair them." Veltar's voice carried exhaustion and worry. "The crystal and power cores we use cannot function efficiently in these temperatures. They were designed for the warm climate of our world." Sarah nodded, watching as other Zephyrians moved slowly between their damaged shelters. Their movements were stiff and labored, a stark contrast to their usual fluid grace. The alien team had lost 3 heating units in the past 2 days alone. Without proper warmth, their mission to study the planet's unique ice formations would have to be abandoned. "How long can your people survive in these conditions?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Perhaps 2 more days, maybe 3 if we reduce physical activity to minimum levels," Veltar replied. "Our metabolic rate slows dramatically in cold environments. It is an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive brief cold snaps, but extended exposure." He paused, unable to finish the sentence. Through the observation dome, Sarah could see the Zephyrian science team struggling to collect ice samples. Dr. Kithara, their lead geologist, was moving so slowly that it took her nearly 10 minutes to cross a distance that should have required 2. Her sampling tools kept slipping from her numbed fingers, and twice Sarah watched her stumble on the uneven ice. The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah. The Zephyrians were brilliant scientists, their technology far surpassing human achievements in many areas. Their ships could travel between star systems in days rather than years. Their medical knowledge had helped cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Their understanding of quantum physics made human theories look like children's drawings. Yet here on this frozen world, their advanced civilization was helpless against something as simple as cold weather. The human team, meanwhile, was thriving. Their expedition members moved freely across the ice, their heated suits maintaining comfortable body temperatures even in the harshest winds. The thermal shelters they had constructed could maintain tropical conditions inside while the storm raged outside. But their success only highlighted the Zephyrians' desperate situation. Sarah walked through the human base camp, observing the stark differences between the 2 species' approaches to survival. The human shelters were practical and efficient, built with materials designed to trap heat and repel moisture. The walls were thick with multiple layers of insulation, and the floors were raised above the ground to prevent heat loss through contact with the frozen surface. The Zephyrian structures, by contrast, were elegant and beautiful but completely inadequate for the environment. Their shelters were designed with their aesthetic sensibilities in mind, featuring flowing curves and translucent panels that would have been perfect for their warm homeworld. On Kepler 442b, these same features became deadly vulnerabilities that allowed precious heat to escape. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human expedition's engineer, approached Sarah with a concerned expression. "I've been monitoring their power consumption," he said, holding up a data tablet. "Their remaining heating units are drawing 3 times the normal power just to maintain minimum temperatures. At this rate, they'll drain their backup power cells within 36 hours. What about sharing our heating systems?" Sarah asked. Marcus shook his head. "I already suggested that to their engineers. Our power systems use completely different energy frequencies. Their equipment would need major modifications to interface with our generators, and we don't have the time or resources for that kind of retrofitting. Sarah looked back toward the Zephyrian camp, where she could see Veltar addressing his team. Even from a distance, she could tell the conversation was difficult. The Zephyrians prided themselves on their technological superiority and scientific achievements. The idea of abandoning their mission due to something as basic as weather was clearly devastating to their morale. The research mission had been planned for months. Both species had invested enormous resources in the expedition to study Kepler 442b's unique ice formations, which contained mineral compounds that could revolutionize energy storage technology. The discovery could benefit both civilizations, but only if they could complete their research before the planet's orbital mechanics carried it further from its star, making the surface even colder and more dangerous. As Sarah watched, a Zephyrian technician emerged from one of their failing shelters. The alien moved with obvious difficulty, each step carefully planned to conserve energy. His breath created thick clouds in the air, and ice had begun forming on the edges of his environmental suit. The sight drove home just how desperate their situation had become. "There has to be something we can do," Sarah muttered to herself. "We can't just watch them freeze to death." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the expedition's anthropologist, joined the conversation. "I've been studying their physiological responses to the cold," she said. "It's fascinating from a scientific perspective, but terrifying from a humanitarian one. Their blood circulation slows dramatically when their core temperature drops even a few degrees. Their cognitive functions become impaired, and their muscle coordination deteriorates rapidly." "So they're essentially going into a form of hibernation?" Marcus asked. "More like hypothermic shock," Jennifer corrected. "Unlike true hibernating species, the Zephyrians don't have the biological mechanisms to survive extended cold exposure safely. If their body temperature continues to drop, they'll enter organ failure." Sarah felt a weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The human team had the resources to survive and complete their mission, but watching their alien colleagues suffer and potentially die while they remained warm and safe felt wrong on every level. The Zephyrians had shared their advanced medical technology freely with humanity, had opened their libraries of scientific knowledge without reservation, and had invited humans to join them as equals in this expedition. She thought about her childhood in northern Alaska, where her grandmother had taught her traditional Inuit survival techniques alongside modern scientific methods. Her grandmother always said that survival wasn't about having the best technology, but about understanding how to work with the environment rather than against it. The wind outside intensified, rattling the observation dome's supports. Through the swirling snow, Sarah could barely make out the Zephyrian camp. Their shelters were glowing faintly with emergency lighting, a sign that their main power systems were failing. She knew that once those lights went dark, the aliens would have only hours before the cold became lethal. "We need to find a solution," Sarah said firmly. "These aren't just research partners, they're our friends. We can't abandon them." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained doubtful. "I'm open to suggestions, but I don't see any quick fixes. Their technology is incompatible with ours, and we can't modify our shelters to accommodate their entire team. The structural requirements alone would take weeks to implement." Sarah stared out at the frozen landscape, her mind racing through possibilities. Somewhere in her memories of growing up in the Arctic, there might be an answer. Traditional survival techniques had kept humans alive in extreme conditions for thousands of years, long before modern technology existed. Maybe the solution didn't require advanced engineering or complex power systems. As the storm continued to rage outside, Sarah began to formulate a plan. It would be unconventional, requiring her to draw on ancient human knowledge rather than modern science. But sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective, and, right now, simple was exactly what the situation demanded. The next morning would bring new challenges, and Sarah knew she had to be ready with an answer. The Zephyrians' lives depended on it, and failure was not an option she was willing to accept. Sarah woke before dawn, her mind immediately focused on the crisis facing their Zephyrian colleagues. Through her shelter's window, she could see the alien camp in the pale morning light. Only 2 of their 6 shelters showed any signs of power, and even those were flickering weakly. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. She dressed quickly in her thermal gear and stepped outside into the bitter morning air. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees overnight, reaching -45 Celsius. Her breath formed instant clouds, and the snow crunched beneath her boots with a sharp, brittle sound that spoke of extreme cold. Walking toward the Zephyrian camp, Sarah observed their deteriorating condition with growing alarm. Commander Veltar emerged from the main shelter, moving like an elderly man despite his species' typically youthful vigor. His silver skin had taken on an alarming blue tint, and ice crystals had formed around his breathing apparatus. Dr. Chen, Veltar's voice was weak, barely audible through the translator. I fear we must consider evacuation. Our people cannot endure much more of this cold. How many of your team members are still functioning normally? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Perhaps half, Veltar admitted. Dr. Kithara collapsed during the night. She is conscious but unable to leave her thermal wrappings. 3 of our technicians have entered the deep cold state, their bodies conserving energy by shutting down non-essential functions. Sarah nodded, understanding that the deep cold state was similar to what humans called severe hypothermia. For Zephyrians, it was a last resort survival mechanism that could keep them alive for a short time but left them completely helpless. Give me 2 hours, Sarah said firmly. I have an idea that might help, but I need time to test it. Veltar's large eyes showed a flicker of hope, though he remained skeptical. Our science teams have explored every technological option. What could you possibly accomplish that our engineers have not considered? Sometimes old solutions work better than new ones, Sarah replied cryptically. Trust me, Commander. I won't let your people freeze to death on my watch. She hurried back to the human base camp, where she found Marcus Webb in the equipment storage area, running diagnostic checks on their backup heating systems. He looked up as she entered, his expression grim. The Zephyrians' power cells are failing faster than predicted, Marcus reported. I estimate they have 12 hours of heating capacity remaining, maybe 14 if they shut down all non-essential systems. I need you to help me gather some specific materials, Sarah said, pulling out a hand-drawn list. Ice blocks, preferably uniform in size. Cutting tools that can shape ice precisely. And all the spare thermal blankets we can spare. Marcus looked at the list with confusion. What exactly are you planning? These materials don't match any standard shelter construction techniques. I'm going to build an igloo, Sarah announced. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at her as if she had suggested flying to the moon using a paper airplane. Dr. Walsh, who had overheard from across the storage area, walked over with a bewildered expression. Did you just say igloo? Jennifer asked. As in, a house made of ice blocks? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. It's a traditional Inuit shelter design that my grandmother taught me when I was a child. Igloos can maintain comfortable temperatures even in extreme cold, using nothing but body heat and the insulating properties of snow. Marcus shook his head. Sarah, I respect your cultural knowledge, but we're dealing with alien physiology here. Even if an igloo could help humans survive, the Zephyrians have completely different thermal requirements. That's exactly why it might work, Sarah explained patiently. Zephyrian body temperature runs about 15 degrees higher than human normal. Their metabolic processes generate more heat than ours, but they're losing that heat too rapidly in their current shelters. An igloo would trap and concentrate their body heat, creating a microenvironment that their biology can work with. She spread out a rough sketch on the equipment table, showing the dome-shaped structure she had in mind. The principle is simple but effective. Snow and ice are excellent insulators when properly arranged. The curved dome shape distributes weight evenly and creates a natural circulation pattern for warm air. Dr. Walsh studied the sketch with growing interest. The physics actually make sense, she admitted. If we could create a small, well-insulated space that retains their body heat, it might stabilize their condition long enough for us to find a more permanent solution. Or long enough for them to complete their research mission, Sarah added. The igloo design is scalable. We could build multiple structures, each housing 2 or 3 Zephyrians. It wouldn't be comfortable by their standards, but it would keep them alive. Marcus remained skeptical but began calculating the materials they would need. Even if the theory is sound, building igloos for an entire alien expedition team is a massive undertaking. Do you actually remember the construction techniques well enough to teach others? Sarah smiled for the first time in days. My grandmother made sure I could build an emergency shelter in any weather conditions. She said you never know when ancient knowledge might save your life. I never thought that life might belong to aliens from another star system. Within an hour, Sarah had assembled a team of volunteers from the human expedition. The construction would require precise cutting of ice blocks and careful assembly to create the proper dome shape. She demonstrated the technique using a small practice structure, showing how each block needed to be shaped and positioned to create a stable, self-supporting dome. The key is the spiral pattern, Sarah explained as she worked. Each block leans slightly inward, supported by the previous block. When we place the capstone at the top, the entire structure becomes incredibly strong. Dr. Lisa Park, the expedition's materials scientist, was fascinated by the engineering principles involved. It's remarkable how the ice blocks actually strengthen each other through compression. The dome shape distributes the load so efficiently that the structure becomes stronger than the sum of its parts. The team worked quickly but carefully, cutting uniform blocks from the cleanest ice they could find. The blocks needed to be large enough to provide structural integrity but light enough for humans to handle in bulky cold weather gear. Sarah guided them through the proper shaping techniques, showing how to cut the slight angles that would allow each block to fit perfectly with its neighbors. As they worked, word spread through the human camp about Sarah's unconventional solution. Initially, there was skepticism and even some gentle mocking about building icehouses for space aliens. However, as the structure took shape and its engineering elegance became apparent, the mood shifted to one of respect and curiosity. I have to admit, this is pretty impressive, commented Dr. Robert Singh, the expedition's geologist. I've studied architectural engineering, and this design is both simple and sophisticated. The thermal dynamics alone are fascinating. The first igloo was completed in just under 3 hours. The dome-shaped structure stood about 2 meters high at its center, with enough floor space to accommodate 3 Zephyrians comfortably. Sarah had incorporated a small entrance tunnel that would help trap warm air inside while allowing access. Now comes the real test, Sarah said, wiping ice crystals from her goggles. We need to measure the internal temperature and see if our theory actually works in practice. They placed several temperature sensors inside the completed igloo and sealed the entrance with a temporary ice block. Even without any heat source inside, the interior temperature was already 10 degrees warmer than the outside air. The insulating properties of the snow and ice were working exactly as Sarah had predicted. This is incredible, Marcus admitted, staring at the readouts on his monitoring equipment. The temperature differential is even better than I hoped. If we add the Zephyrians' natural body heat, the interior could reach levels that would allow them to function normally. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she watched the numbers on the temperature display continue to climb. The ancient knowledge passed down from her grandmother might actually save lives on a planet hundreds of light years from Earth. Sometimes the simplest solutions really were the best ones. Let's build 3 more, she announced to the team. If this works, we're going to house the entire Zephyrian expedition in igloos. And then, I'm going to give them a lecture they'll never forget about human ingenuity and survival techniques. The team members laughed and cheered, their earlier skepticism completely replaced by enthusiasm and determination. They had found a solution, and now it was time to implement it before the Zephyrians' condition deteriorated any further. By midday, 4 completed igloos stood in a neat row between the human and Zephyrian camps. Each structure was a masterpiece of ancient engineering, their smooth dome shapes gleaming in the weak sunlight. Sarah stood back to admire their work, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched steam rising gently from the entrance tunnels, indicating that the internal temperatures were rising exactly as planned. Commander Veltar approached slowly, his movements still stiff from the cold but his expression filled with curiosity and desperate hope. Behind him, several Zephyrian team members followed, their silver skin showing the telltale blue tinge of hypothermic stress. Dr. Kithara was among them, supported by 2 colleagues but determined to see this potential solution for herself. Dr. Chen, Veltar said, his translator crackling with static from the cold, these structures are unlike anything in our architectural databases. You constructed them entirely from frozen water? Ice and compacted snow, Sarah confirmed. It's a building technique my people developed thousands of years ago to survive in environments just like this. The principle is simple but incredibly effective. She gestured toward the nearest igloo, where wisps of warm air were visible rising from the entrance. The dome shape creates perfect structural stability while the ice blocks provide insulation. Your body heat will warm the interior to comfortable temperatures, and the curved walls will circulate the warm air efficiently. Dr. Kithara stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her physical discomfort. This contradicts our basic understanding of thermal dynamics. How can structures made of ice possibly retain heat? Ice should conduct cold, not preserve warmth. That's a common misconception, Sarah explained patiently. Ice and snow are actually excellent insulators when properly arranged. The key is trapping air between the ice crystals and creating barriers that prevent heat transfer. These blocks contain thousands of tiny air pockets that act like insulation. She led the group to the first igloo and demonstrated the entrance technique. You crawl through this low tunnel, which creates a cold trap. Cold air is heavy, so it stays in the tunnel while warm air rises into the dome. Once you're inside, your body heat will raise the temperature quickly. Veltar examined the entrance tunnel with obvious skepticism. The opening appears very small. Will it accommodate our physiology? I designed it based on your average body measurements, Sarah assured him. It might be snug, but that's intentional. A smaller entrance means less heat loss. Dr. Marcus Webb approached with his monitoring equipment, ready to record data on the experiment. Internal temperature in the test igloo has stabilized at -15 Celsius without any occupants. That's 30 degrees warmer than outside air temperature. The Zephyrians exchanged glances, their large eyes reflecting both hope and scientific skepticism. Their entire civilization was built on advanced technology and sophisticated engineering. The idea of surviving using primitive ice structures seemed almost insulting to their technological pride. Commander, Dr. Kithara said quietly, our people are approaching critical hypothermic states. Perhaps we should test this human solution, regardless of how unconventional it appears. Veltar nodded slowly. Dr. Chen, would you demonstrate this shelter's effectiveness? Our scientists need to understand the principles before we risk our team members' lives. Of course, Sarah replied. But first, let me explain exactly how this works so your people understand they're not relying on magic, just physics. She gathered the mixed group of humans and Zephyrians around the nearest igloo, using a portable holographic projector to display diagrams of heat circulation patterns and insulation principles. The Zephyrians leaned in closely, their scientific minds engaging with the problem despite their physical discomfort. The dome shape is crucial, Sarah began, highlighting the curved structure on her display. It provides maximum internal volume with minimum surface area, reducing heat loss through the walls. The circular base distributes weight evenly, preventing structural collapse even under heavy snow loads. Dr. Kithara raised a trembling hand, her movements slow due to the cold. What prevents the structure from melting when internal temperatures rise? Excellent question, Sarah smiled. The inside surface will develop a thin layer of ice glaze when warm air meets the cold walls. This glaze actually strengthens the structure and creates an additional moisture barrier. As long as the external temperature remains well below freezing, the walls maintain their integrity. She switched to a thermal dynamics diagram showing air circulation patterns. Warm air from your body heat rises to the dome's peak, then circulates back down along the walls. This creates a convection current that distributes heat evenly throughout the space. The sleeping platform here, she pointed to a raised area in the diagram, keeps you elevated where the warmest air accumulates. The explanation continued for 20 minutes, covering structural engineering, thermal dynamics, and even the psychological aspects of shelter design. Sarah noticed that despite their desperate situation, the Zephyrians were taking detailed notes and asking sophisticated technical questions. Their scientific minds were engaging with the problem, treating it as a fascinating puzzle rather than a primitive survival technique. Now for the practical demonstration, Sarah announced. She had changed into lighter clothing, wearing only a standard expedition suit rather than her heavy thermal gear. I'll spend 30 minutes inside the igloo and document the temperature changes and comfort levels. She crawled through the entrance tunnel, feeling the immediate temperature difference as she moved from the bitter outside air into the shelter's protected environment. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with enough room to sit comfortably or lie down on the raised sleeping platform. Marcus monitored her vital signs and the internal temperature from outside, calling out readings every 5 minutes. Internal temp is rising rapidly. -10 Celsius and climbing. Sarah's core body temperature is stable and her heart rate is actually decreasing as her body relaxes. Through the small observation port they had built into the dome, the Zephyrians could see Sarah moving around comfortably inside the structure. She was demonstrating various positions and activities, showing how someone could rest, work, or even exercise within the confined space. After 15 minutes, the internal temperature had reached -2 Celsius, a remarkable 43-degree difference from the outside air. Sarah's voice came clearly through the communication device. It's actually comfortable in here. I could easily spend hours in this environment without any additional heating. Dr. Kithara turned to her colleagues with obvious amazement. The thermal efficiency is extraordinary. Their simple construction technique has achieved insulation values that rival our advanced materials. More importantly, Veltar added, it requires no power source, no complex technology, and can be built with materials available anywhere on this planet. It is elegant in its simplicity. When Sarah emerged from the igloo after 30 minutes, her cheeks were flushed with warmth rather than cold. She moved normally, showing no signs of the stiffness or discomfort that had been plaguing the Zephyrians for days. The demonstration speaks for itself, she announced. Who wants to be the first to try survival the human way? Dr. Kithara volunteered immediately, her scientific curiosity overcoming any remaining skepticism. She crawled through the entrance tunnel awkwardly, her longer limbs making the passage more difficult than it had been for Sarah. But, once inside, her relief was immediately apparent through the observation port. The temperature difference is remarkable, she reported through her communicator. I can feel my body beginning to warm already. The cramped space is actually beneficial because it concentrates my body heat efficiently. Within minutes, Kithara's silver skin began to return to its normal lustrous color. Her movements became more fluid, and her voice grew stronger and clearer. The igloo was working exactly as Sarah had predicted, providing a warm refuge that allowed Zephyrian physiology to function normally. This is acceptable, Kithara announced, and, coming from a Zephyrian scientist, that was equivalent to enthusiastic praise. Commander Veltar made the decision immediately. We will evacuate our failing shelters and move into these ice structures. Dr. Chen, your ancient human wisdom may have saved our entire expedition. Over the next 2 hours, the Zephyrians transferred their essential equipment and supplies into the 4 igloos. Each structure could accommodate 3 individuals comfortably, providing enough space for the entire alien team. Sarah supervised the relocation, offering advice on how to maximize warmth retention and organize the limited space efficiently. As the afternoon progressed, the transformation in the Zephyrian team was remarkable. Their energy levels returned to normal, their cognitive functions sharpened, and their natural scientific enthusiasm reasserted itself. They began discussing plans to resume their research mission, confident that they now had reliable shelter that would allow them to complete their work. Dr. Chen, Veltar approached as the relocation was completed. Our people owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. You have given us not just survival, but the opportunity to complete our mission and contribute to the advancement of both our species. Sarah smiled, watching the steam rising gently from the 4 igloo entrances as the Zephyrians settled into their new homes. Sometimes the best solutions are the oldest ones. But now I think it's time for that lecture I promised. Your people need to understand not just how these shelters work, but why human ingenuity has allowed us to survive and thrive in environments across the galaxy. The stage was set for a cross-cultural exchange that would bridge thousands of years of human knowledge with advanced alien science, proving that wisdom and innovation could come from the most unexpected sources. 3 days later, Sarah stood before an audience that represented two different worlds and countless centuries of accumulated knowledge. The impromptu lecture hall was the largest of the igloos, modified with additional space and illuminated by portable lights that cast dancing shadows on the curved ice walls. The Zephyrian scientific team sat on improvised benches made from ice blocks, their silver skin now glowing with healthy warmth rather than the blue tinge of hypothermic distress. Today I want to talk about something my grandmother called survival wisdom, Sarah began, her breath visible in small puffs despite the comfortable temperature inside the igloo. It's the knowledge that gets passed down not through databases or digital libraries, but through stories, demonstrations, and hands-on experience. Commander Veltar raised his hand, a gesture he had learned from observing human customs. Dr. Chen, before you begin, our team would like to express our gratitude formally. You have saved not just our lives, but our mission and our scientific honor. The other Zephyrians made a harmonious humming sound, their equivalent of applause. Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the igloo's insulating properties. Thank you, but what I did wasn't unique or special, Sarah replied. Any human from my grandmother's generation would have known these techniques. That's what I want you to understand about human survival wisdom. It's not individual brilliance, it's collective knowledge refined over thousands of years. She activated a small holographic projector, displaying images of various human survival structures from across Earth's history. Humans evolved as a nomadic species on a planet with extreme climate variations. We didn't have the luxury of stable, controlled environments like your homeworld. We had to learn to survive in deserts, jungles, mountains, and Arctic regions using nothing but our intelligence and the materials available locally. Dr. Kithara leaned forward with interest. Your species developed separately on each continent, yet many of these shelter designs show remarkable similarities. How do you explain this convergent innovation? That's exactly the point, Sarah smiled. When humans face similar challenges, we often develop similar solutions independently. The igloo design I taught you has variations in Alaska, Greenland, northern Canada, and Siberia. None of these populations had contact with each other when they developed these techniques, but the physics of heat retention and structural stability led them to very similar conclusions. She switched to a diagram showing the evolution of igloo construction techniques. My grandmother's people, the Inuit, have been building these shelters for over 4,000 years. Each generation has refined the design, passing down not just the techniques but the understanding of why they work. Dr. Zenthara, the Zephyrian expedition's anthropologist, raised her hand. This suggests that human survival knowledge represents a form of distributed intelligence. Each individual carries a portion of collective wisdom that has been tested and proven over centuries. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. And that's why it's so effective. These techniques haven't survived because they're theoretically elegant, but because they keep people alive in real-world conditions. They've been tested by thousands of individuals over hundreds of generations. She gestured around the igloo's interior, where the mixed team of humans and Zephyrians sat comfortably despite the raging blizzard outside. Your people have achieved incredible technological advancement. You can travel between stars, manipulate matter at the quantum level, and cure diseases that would have killed entire human populations a century ago. But, when faced with simple environmental challenges, sometimes ancient wisdom proves more practical than advanced technology. Marcus Webb, who had been taking detailed notes on the cross-cultural exchange, spoke up. What fascinates me is how quickly the Zephyrians adapted to using these shelters. Despite their completely different evolutionary background, the basic principles of thermodynamics apply universally. That raises an important point about the nature of intelligence itself, Sarah continued. The Zephyrians understood the physics immediately once it was explained. Their scientific knowledge allowed them to grasp concepts that took human centuries to develop through trial and error. But they lacked the practical experience that comes from generations of environmental pressure. Veltar nodded thoughtfully. On Zephyr Prime, our ancestors solved environmental challenges through technology rather than adaptation. We modified our surroundings to suit our needs rather than developing techniques to survive in hostile conditions. This approach served us well until we encountered environments beyond our technological capabilities. Both approaches have value, Sarah emphasized. Your technology allowed you to reach this planet and conduct research that will benefit both our species. Our survival wisdom kept you alive long enough to complete that research. The combination of Zephyrian science and human practical knowledge has proven more powerful than either approach alone. She switched to a new set of images showing various human innovations born from necessity. This is why humans often surprise other species with our adaptability. We've learned to see every environment as a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be avoided. When we can't change our surroundings, we change ourselves or our methods. Dr. Kithara stood up, her movements now fluid and confident in the warm environment. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to share more of these survival techniques? Our databases contain extensive information about human technology and culture, but very little about these practical skills that you call survival wisdom. I'd be honored to, Sarah replied. But remember, this knowledge works best when it's learned through practice, not just theory. My grandmother always said that reading about building an igloo and actually building one in a blizzard are two completely different things. Over the next hour, Sarah shared techniques for finding water in arid environments, creating fire without modern tools, navigating without instruments, and identifying edible plants in unfamiliar territories. The Zephyrians listened with fascination, occasionally asking questions that revealed the sophisticated scientific principles underlying seemingly simple survival methods. Your species has developed a remarkable form of applied physics, Dr. Zenthara observed. These techniques represent centuries of empirical research conducted under survival conditions. The knowledge base is as extensive as any formal scientific discipline. And, just as important, added Veltar. We have learned that technological advancement cannot replace practical wisdom. Both forms of knowledge are necessary for true progress. As the lecture continued, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening. The Zephyrians weren't just learning human techniques, they were beginning to think like human survivors. They started asking questions about adapting the igloo design for different environments, ways to improve efficiency using their advanced materials, and methods for combining traditional techniques with modern technology. This is what I hoped would happen, Sarah said, observing their enthusiastic discussions. You're not just copying human methods, you're building on them. You're taking survival wisdom and enhancing it with your scientific understanding. Dr. Marcus Webb pulled up thermal efficiency readings on his tablet. The data supports that conclusion. The Zephyrians have already suggested modifications to the igloo design that could improve heat retention by 15%. They're innovating based on the foundation you provided. The collaborative spirit in the igloo was infectious. Human and Zephyrian scientists began working together on problems that neither species could solve alone. The humans contributed practical experience and intuitive problem-solving abilities, while the Zephyrians offered advanced theoretical knowledge and sophisticated analytical tools. This is why exploration and cooperation matter, Sarah concluded her lecture. We all have different strengths and knowledge bases. When we share freely and learn from each other, we become stronger than any of us could be alone. As the session ended, Commander Veltar stood to address both teams. Dr. Chen, your people have given us more than survival techniques. You have shown us the value of humility and the importance of learning from all sources of wisdom, regardless of their origin or technological level. He gestured around the igloo that had become their temporary classroom. When we return to Zephyr Prime, we will carry with us not just the scientific data we came to collect, but a new understanding of human ingenuity and the power of practical wisdom. Our libraries will be enhanced with survival knowledge, and our education will include practical skills alongside theoretical study. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she looked around at the mixed group of humans and aliens, all working together in a shelter built with techniques older than recorded history. The igloo had saved the Zephyrians' lives, but it had also created something more valuable, a bridge between two very different approaches to knowledge and survival. My grandmother always said that the best teachers are the ones who learn as much as they teach, Sarah reflected. Today, I understand what she meant. Thank you all for being such excellent students and even better colleagues. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the frozen landscape of Kepler 442b. But, inside the warmth of their ancient shelters, two species continued their vital research, their friendship strengthened by the shared understanding that wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources, and that survival often depends not on having the best technology, but on knowing how to use whatever resources are available. The mission would be completed successfully, the research data would advance both civilizations, and the bond between humans and Zephyrians would be stronger than ever. All because sometimes the oldest solutions are still the best solutions, and true wisdom transcends the boundaries between species and stars.